Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is a question clearly made by a cat lover. And it's a very cute, interesting question that illustrates a lot of things, okay? So I'm going to read it, and then we're going to try to understand it, so to speak. In the fruitless efforts to prove that dogs make better pets, dog lovers survey 400 people. So they go around, they talk to 400 people. Could have done something better with that time, if you ask me. But nevertheless, they go around and talk to 400 people. And they take a survey. Their survey, if you trust them, that is. Their survey reveals that 54% of the people, in fact, 54% of people believe dogs make better pets. Could it be? Okay, well, cat lovers do better algebra, I must say. So watch. The question is from their point of view. What is the margin of error, we would say? Really? How accurate is your data? Okay? So the question that we want to ask is, what is the margin of error? Okay, and then we should say, does this study conclusively show that the majority of the people believe erroneously that dogs do indeed make better pets? In other words, you got 54%, right? Maybe you just went to the wrong neighborhood. Yes? How do you know that the data you collected accurately reflects what the society really is? You follow? That's what we want to know. Okay. And there's a second part to the question, okay. So, this question is about this concept of margin of error. Okay, so what's the margin of error here is what we're asking, okay? So, first I'm going to try to explain to us, or remind ourselves what margin of error means, okay? For example, it says here, the chances of finding something, let's say the sneakers, the chances of finding a blue sneakers in a store is like 35% plus or minus 2%. Okay, what is that? So this is margin of error, see? That means the range could be 33 to 37%. You understand? In other words, this is what we think it is, but really, this is, if you have this broad range, you would be pretty much, you got everybody in there. Do you understand? So in this example, here with the kittens, I obviously, they're all less creatures that would create more, right? So now, this is like this, okay? So here's a population, okay? And when you do a survey, you're just picking a part of the population, right? And then the survey says here that 54% of the people like dogs, okay? They make better pets. But how do we know that 54% is really what the rest of the society or really represents? Now, if you were to, for example, ask everybody in a society, you might find out that indeed only 21% of the people think dogs make better pets. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, because sample is just a sample. That's why it's called a sample, right? Okay. But the margin of error is an important concept, okay? Let's see if the margin of error over here, if the margin of error here was 2%, so 54% plus or minus 2%. First of all, understand margin of error is a percentage, right? You follow? So margin of error 2%, if it was so, then we would say between 52% to 56%. So now that's what that means. In other words, between 52 to 56% of the people think that. That's what the margin of error says. Okay, it's not maybe exactly 54, but it's not going to be more than 52 to 56. Do you understand that? That's what margin of error means. You follow? So we have to understand conceptually what it means. And then we have to understand how to calculate it. And thankfully, the formula is easy. It's a piece of cake. The formula for margin of error, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it ME, margin of error, like this, is an easy one. Plus or minus, because it's plus or minus, 1 over square root of n, where n is the number of the samples, people in the sample. Do you understand? It's that easy. It's 1 over square root of n. In this case, what's n? N is 400. You follow? So margin of error, you can call it ME. You can call it mole if you want, margin of error. But whatever you call it, as long as you do it correctly. Margin of error is plus or minus 1 over square root of n. Okay? So now, if you do this for this particular sample, you get plus or minus 1 over square root of 400. Okay? That is plus or minus 1. What's the square root of 400? That is what? 20. And this is plus or minus 0.05. Or 5%. So now, margin of error is 5%, see? So now it says, the survey said 54% of the people prefer dog, with a margin of error plus or minus 5%, which means what? It could be 49% to 59%. And if it is 49%, ta-da! Clearly dogs don't make better pets, because only 49% of the people said that. Do you understand? So the first question here was, what's the margin of error? Margin of error was 5%. Right? Then the second question is, does this study conclusively show that majority of the people believe erroneously that dogs indeed make better pets? It says no, because it could be 49%. It's not the majority. Yes? So we tell dogs to go do another study, wouldn't you? Okay. But they're tough too, say dog lovers. They say, oh, how many more people do they need to survey to prove their point conclusively? But dog lovers said they're going to come learn some algebra from the cat lovers. And they said, okay, if you're going to prove this conclusively, what are they going to have to prove? What's the margin of error is going to have to be?
51. Sorry, the margin of error?
The margin of error. Now, if they could say, well, the 54% did this, and our margin of error was plus or minus, if it was plus or minus 4, they'd get 50, right?
Yeah.
Right? You know what I'm saying? So it has to be a little bigger than that, right? You follow what I'm saying? So, do you understand? So first they have to figure out, they have to just get 4%, and they got one more person to say dog lovers about it. Then they're done, right?
So the actual percentage has to be 50 or 51?
It has to be greater than 50.
Yeah.
But if you figure out what makes 50, then you know you can figure out what's greater than 50. Do you understand? To conclusively prove that 50 have to be bigger than 50. So we want their margin of error to be, they want their margin of error to be at least 4%. Okay, so then we have to figure out how many people would you need to make a margin of error 4%. Piece of cake. Because the margin of error formula is this, 1 over square root of n. I'm just going to take out a plus or minus because it's a percentage, right? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Even if you subtract it by 4, right? It's going to be 50, and it's still not more.
I'm with you. But then you can add, they can grab a couple of people, beat them up and say they're dog lovers, and then you'll get more than 50, right? If you know what 50 is, you can tell what more than 50 is. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So we're going to calculate. We want the margin of error to be 4% here, right? So that's 0.04. Correct? And then we solve for n, right?
Yeah.
It's easy as pie. So 1 and multiply both sides by the square root of 0.04 times square root of n. And then divide both sides by that, and that's square root of n. Okay? So that's 25. So, and then square that, what you get? N is? 625. So they need that many people to have a margin of error for. So they need to go talk. The question says, how many more people do they need to go? Well, how many more? Well, they got 400. They have to go 5, another 225, right?
Plus like
Yes, 225. They really need like 226, right? 226 will give a margin of error less than 4. 225 will be exact 4%. If you can't get more than, it can't be 225.5 people, right? Because you can't cut people in half. So it's going to be 226 people is what they're going to need. 225 will be exactly 50%. 226 will be, they'll give a margin of 4. And then we'll go. And then what do we go say? Okay, you go do your study. Then come back. Then we'll talk. Right? That's it.
So
That's margin of error.
The final answer would be 226 then?
The two, yes, for this particular question, you want more than that, right? So it'll be 226. Okay, assalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum.